Dr. Jazz.
The jazz. But
Dr. Jazz.
thanks, Bill, for finding the time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
You know, I have you on so many records and talked to so many guys you've played with, so I said I'll drop you a line.
Yeah, well, I've been very fortunate, somebody coming from northeastern Ohio and having no idea about jazz until I was about 14 or 15 years old. So I'm very thankful for all the great experiences that I've had and all the mentors that I've gotten to play with and learn from.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you this, but since you mentioned it, what happened when you were 14 or 15? How did you
Well,
discover jazz, actually? I mean, we're talking about still the 60s, actually, right?
yeah, I started studying classical piano when I was 9, and I was over at a friend's house from high school. I think I was about 14 or 15, and he was not a musician, but they had an upright piano in the house, and his father was a jazz fan. So one day I was over there, and he put on some records by the Ahmad Jamal Trio, with Rennell Fournier and Israel Crosby, and
Oh, yeah.
Earl Garner's Concert by the Sea, and the Modern Jazz Quartet. And this was,
Classics.
I think Dave Brubeck had already put out Take Five, but he played me this other record, which is still one of my favorites, the same quartet called Gone with the Wind. That's all songs associated with the South. And
Yep.
yeah, immediately I could hear what was going on. And I loved chromatic harmony and all the stuff from Bach and the Romantic composers. But I had no idea how they did what they did. So as soon as I heard that music, that was my goal for life. Figure this stuff out. How does somebody play a theme and then do improvisations that are based on the melody and the chords? So I started trying to transcribe things that I could.
Okay.
And also, I found out from the classical piano teacher that I had, I told him that I was interested in studying harmony and theory, because especially since I got interested in jazz. But I also wanted to know more about how the music that I loved that I was playing, like Bach and Chopin and
Yeah.
Brahms and things like that. How did they come up with that stuff, and what is the process? So he turned me on to a organist that was the music director at a local Presbyterian church. And I studied organ for a couple of years too. So that was interesting, although I never kept it up, just getting to the point where I could play some of the Bach chorale preludes and things and use the feet as well as the hands. And he was a great theory and just basic composition teacher, the basic techniques of composition, how to take some of these pieces I was playing and take them apart and see how they were put together.
Interesting. What's your I mean, you said you wanted to learn, how it all works, harmony and melody, and you've written tons of music and arranged through the years then.
Yeah, so it all started with that, but one of the other, well, I had several important things that helped me out. One thing was, I think when I was a freshman at Kent State, that would have been in 65. There was a local piano player. He had been in New York for a while, but he developed a serious drug problem. So he came back to the Akron, Cleveland area and did private teaching. And he had a trio, and they played a concert at this auditorium at Kent State. And the bass player, his name was Roland Palucci, and I'd heard of him, and I knew he lived not too far from where I lived. So I went to hear them and really loved the music, and introduced myself afterwards. And Roland really helped me when I was transcribing things from recordings, not just piano solos, but trying to figure out the arrangements of some of the 2 and 3 horn stuff I was listening to by Horace Silver and the Jazz Tent and things like that. So he actually would organize sessions at his house and invite professional musicians that were 15 or 20 years older than I was over. And they would read through the transcriptions that I'd done, to see if it sounded accurate. And we would play some music together, and I learned a ton from that. And then I guess as a result of maybe well, another aspect of it too, which helped me a lot later on, is what Kent State, they had no interest in jazz. You know, most of the music schools at that time, they didn't want anything to do with jazz. But in spite of that, there were a bunch of students that started the same year that I did that decided we were going to have a big band. And in spite of all the administration's attempts to block it, we got to know the people that were involved in student activities at the school, and they arranged to set up informal dorm concerts for us. So we'd have like at least one place a semester to perform for a public, give us some incentive to rehearse. And I think after just a year or so, the president of the university and the dean of fine arts, they would hear us at events like homecoming or parents' weekend. So they started writing notes to the head of the music school that didn't even want us to be doing anything there. They were saying, "Hey, we heard you're a jazz band at this function or that function. They were fantastic. You must be so proud of them." So after that, they got a faculty advisor so we could get credit for the big band as an ensemble. And they had competitive festivals in those days that were sponsored by the cigarette and liquor companies and Downbeat magazine and the airlines and so on. And there were about 10 or 12 local sites, and then the small groups and big bands and soloists that won the top awards at those sites. Those companies actually paid the travel expenses and hotel expenses for those groups to compete at a different national site every year. So by the time I finished my master's degree there in 1970, we'd been national finalists 3 years, and as a result of that, we got invited to play at the Montreux Jazz Festival in 1970. This was another thing which is really interesting too. If you read about this stuff, you'd even doubt that it took place probably. But in this little town of Kent, in the main strip, there was this bar and restaurant called Eddie's Stag Bar, and we got the guy there to have the big band there on Monday nights. He charged $1 at the door, and that was enough at that time to pay a scale for one night. And when the people that we were playing for there, when they found out that we got invited to Montreux and the music school was not going to do anything to help out raise the money to send us there, these business people organized a whole series of trust fund concerts, and they raised the money to send the band to Switzerland. And besides doing our own set there, there was they had a lot of radio big bands in Europe at the time. There aren't too many left now. Primarily, I think the ones in Germany, and there are a few in Scandinavia as well. But at that time, every major city in Western Europe, they had their radio big band, and the big band from Vienna was there that time. And they sent a small group actually, but Art Farmer was living in Vienna at the time.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And he was one of the main soloists in the band. So the festival also invited us to be a backup band and play a set with Art Farmer at the festival. So that was a great experience. And not only that, but when the people from the ORF band from Vienna, when they heard our band, and especially the trombone section, over the next 2 or 3 years, it ended up that all 4 of the trombonists ended up going over there and working with the big band.
Wow. And
2 of them ended up actually staying in Europe and spending the rest of their lives there. And yeah, so
that's amazing.
It shows you how some things like that can work out. But besides starting the jazz program there, then another key thing was, well, there are 2 things I should mention before we go on. One thing is I had a great classical piano teacher. His name was Earl Kelly, and he really taught me the fundamentals of playing the instrument really well. So even though I practiced like a maniac, I never had any problems with tendonitis or some of the problems some pianists or string players tend to have. And then the composition teacher, I was a double major, classical piano and composition. And the composition teacher, I don't think anybody else taught composition at that time like this. They were already heavy into the avant-garde and kind of making up your own language. But this guy, he was in his mid-30s, I think his name was Fred Coulter. And all the undergraduate composition majors, before we could write personal music, we all had to write a portfolio of studies. So we had to write a two-part fugue in the style of the Bach duets, and then a sonata allegro movement in the style of either Mozart or Haydn, and then a string quartet movement in the style of either the middle or late Beethoven quartets,
The
a
classic
romantic
subject.
song in the style of either Hugo Wolf or Richard Strauss, and then impressionistic study, we could pick the composer, and then a free tonal study like Hindemith, Poulenc, Milhaud, that kind of thing, and then a free atonal study, and then a 12-tone study, and then a serial study.
Wow.
So we had to do all of that in our first 2 years. And then after we did that, we could write whatever we wanted to write. And he didn't care if we wanted to write tonal music or what we wanted to do after that. And he was really a great teacher.
A great basis, yeah.
You knew all that stuff well enough to let us know when, you know, this part of the Mozart thing didn't really sound authentic and we needed to check out this piece a little more, or that piece a little more. So it was great training. So when I started doing a lot of transcribing in jazz, it really helped me to figure out theoretically and harmonically what was going on in the music, what the language was about. Probably saved me quite a few years.
Yeah.
The other thing was that when the band got to the point where we felt like we were good enough that we could invite a internationally known soloist without embarrassing ourselves, but the first person we invited was Clark Terry.
Oh, really? Oh, wow, man. Okay.
And Clark was just amazing. He loved the band, and he was like a great mentor from that time. We saw him occasionally when we would be in the finals of the national festivals, and he would be on the judging panels. And I wrote a piece for him to come to play when he came the first time. And when we took him back to the airport, he said, "Got to invite me back next year." But he said, "If you invite me back next year, and I'll bring Joe Williams with me." And we said, "Clark, you know, the people here, they don't even want us to have a big band. I don't know if we can raise that much money." And he said, "Well, just give me what you gave me this year, and I'll bring Joe Williams back for the same amount." So he brought Joe Williams back, and then the amazing thing, really, this was about a year after that record had come out with Thad Jones, Mel Lewis Band with Joe Williams, and the arrangements by Thad and Bob Brookmeyer. So about 6 weeks before the concert was supposed to happen, this big package came in the mail, and it was scores and set of parts for 6 of the charts from that record.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah, so we were in heaven, you know, practicing that music and then getting to play with Clark and Joe.
Wow. How did then textures happen? Because it was kind of the same period, almost, but it was
the same period,
name, right?
yeah.
Was it the same band actually that you practiced, or because that one is then under your name, right?
Yeah, it was under my name, but it was basically the Kent State Band plus, one tenor player, Ernie Krivda. He was one of the better known players in the Cleveland area at that time, and he was, I think, maybe at least 3 or 4 years older than Joe Lovano, and he knew Joe, he knew Joe's dad, and he spent quite a bit of time in New York, I think, in the 80s and 90s, but eventually went back to the Cleveland area and got a teaching job at Cuyahoga Community College, and they had a jazz festival there every summer. We kind of kept up a relationship, and later on we also did a duo record for Koch Jazz called The Art of the Ballad. And then there was also one of the trumpet players from the band, I think, but otherwise it was the Kent State Band. And we met this guy. He later was one of the producers of the stuff for that label, Koch Jazz. His name was Jack Renner, and he was actually from the Cleveland area, so he used to come and hear the band regularly. And he gave me a call or got in touch with me somehow and offered to record the band, do like a professional recording for. It was his label at the time, Advent. So this was long before Koch Jazz, maybe as long as 15 years before that. Yeah. So that's how that happened, and there's a copy of that in the Eastman Library, and it's great because there's the students as they would go over sometimes. I never told them about that record, but sometimes they would discover it and they would say, "Wow, that band that you were in college, that already sounded great." And I said, "Yeah, it's really a pretty good band.
Yeah.
It stood the test of time pretty well."
Yeah, and the arrangements and everything. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing stuff.
yeah.
When did you start playing also smaller formats? I listened to that album with Michael Moore and Bill Goodwin, The Roads
Oh
Traveled,
yeah,
and I love that stuff because to hear in a smaller format. Like, when did you start playing trio, and how did that record happen?
Well, I started playing trio actually. This was another great thing that happened. So many of these, I don't know, seemingly by chance things, that end up being major steps for your development. First of all, just in learning to play jazz, it was interesting when I was still in Akron before. I guess I had started at Kent State because I was just old enough to play in clubs, so I must have been at least 18. There was a trio of these three black guys, a really great singer who sang a lot like Arthur Prysock or Billy Eckstein.
Mm.
And he also played what they called then a cocktail drum set, which was it was like just a bass drum, a hi-hat, and a sock cymbal and a ride cymbal. And so you could play that and sing at the same time. And then there was a bass player, really great bass player named Bobby Reed. Bobby Reeves, the singer and drummer, and his name was Harold Wright. And this piano player that played with them, his name was Ace Carter. He decided at a certain point to just do solo gigs because it was a lot more lucrative. And they had heard about me. I don't know even where they heard about me because my jazz playing I felt it was kind of rudimentary at the time, but they invited me to get together with them. So I went over to the singer's house and we would rehearse over there on Saturdays. There wasn't any music because the bass player didn't read music, but the singer knew about maybe 80 or so standard, American songbook songs, what the tunes were and the keys, and the bass player knew what the bass lines were. So I had to listen to the melody and the bass lines and figure out what went in between. So it was really great training, and we ended up playing professionally a lot in the Akron, Cleveland area, especially like at Brown Derby restaurants and restaurants or lounges where they had jazz, and that was a great learning experience for me. And I guess through some of that kind of trio playing, some of the people in Cleveland, like Ernie Krivda, he found out about me, I guess, through the grapevine that way. And after I taught theory and directed the big band, after getting my master's degree at Kent State, there was a trio that was at this restaurant bar in Cleveland. It was a really good restaurant called the Theatrical Restaurant, and it was pretty near the old baseball stadium. And this was at the time when, this would have been in the very early 70s, around 69, 70. At that time, there were a lot of daytime entertainment shows that were actually broadcast from cities other than New York or LA. And they had a morning show that came out locally from Cleveland with this entertainer singer. His name was Mike Douglas. It's a Mike Douglas show, and they had most of the shows then at that time that were that format. They had either a piano trio or maybe a piano trio with a couple of horns, mainly to back up singers that were guests on the show, and then to play in and out to the commercials. So the pianist at that time, she was a female pianist named Ellie Frankel. And in 1970, the show moved from Cleveland to Philadelphia. So she went with the show, but of course she had to hire Philadelphia musicians. So the drummer from the trio, his name was Bob McKee, really great drummer, and was a really good bass player named Lamar Gaines. He took over the trio at the Theatrical, and just like with this other trio I had played with at Akron, originally they had this pianist named Hank Cahoot, who he could play all the Art Tatum, Fats Waller, Earl Hines, all that kind of stuff. And again, he decided at a certain point to just do solo gigs, cocktail parties, and things like that. So they invited me to take over the piano chair in that job, and they played 6 nights a week at this restaurant. And not only that, but they had featured groups, which were older jazz players. So people like Clark Terry and Jonah Jones and Earl Hines and Teddy Wilson, Cy Oliver, Cozy Cole, different people like that. They would be the headliners, and then we would play intermission. So that was Monday through Saturday, and then around the same time there was a modern jazz room that was in another part of town, a little outside of downtown, called the Smiling Dog Saloon. And they had all the modern groups like Keith Jarrett's Quartet and Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock's Sextet and Cannonball Adderley. So while I was playing at the theatrical 6 nights a week, Ernie Krivda and I put a quintet together, and we played intermissions on Sunday nights at the Smiling Dog. So I not only got to play 7 nights a week the whole 2 years I lived in Cleveland, but I got to hear fabulous music every night and meet all these musicians. So who could ask for a better education than that?
Yeah, that's the way to learn.
Yeah.
Wow. Amazing.
And then the thing at Eastman happened almost serendipitously in a similar way. While I was playing jazz in composition, I had also been involved in not only composing, but performing 20th century and avant-garde piano music and chamber music. So I had worked, I played chamber music programs. They had a really good program at a music center near Cleveland called the Blossom Music Center. It was connected with the Cleveland Orchestra. And they had summer chamber music programs. And one of the cycles that they did every summer was directed by Pierre Boulez.
Oh, wow.
Contemporary chamber music. So I got to do some contemporary chamber music under his direction. And the pianist that was the regular pianist for the Cleveland Orchestra, a lady named Joella Jones, she told me about this international competition they had called the Gaudiamus competition, which was for interpreters of contemporary music. And it was not for any specific instrument or combination, but it was for solo instruments or any combination of instruments up to, I think, 6 instruments, nothing larger than that. And she had been a prize winner, so she encouraged me to enter this competition because I had done a couple things with the Akron Symphony at the time. I did this one piece that involved the jazz quartet by Ned Rorem, and I also had actually played the Bartok Third Piano Concerto with the Akron Symphony Orchestra with the guest conductor, and done one of the things with the Cleveland Orchestra as well with Boulez. One of the symphony concerts, in addition to the orchestral repertoire, they played this piece of Stravinsky, Les Noces, which was a piece for a big chorus and 3 pianos and percussion. So I got to be one of the pianists for that. So I entered the Gaudiamus competition and ended up being a prize winner. That was in 1972. So at that time, I was still considering whether to continue my main focus on jazz or on contemporary classical music. And I had been accepted as a student of this composer in England, Cornelius Cardew.
Yeah.
But I hadn't accepted that yet. We were kind of thinking about making plans to go there. My wife, Darlene, was a Canadian citizen, and at that time the ties were a lot closer. So we were thinking, well, if I go the route of contemporary classical music, I might be starting out in London, and it would probably be easier for her to get employment there since she's a Canadian citizen. But around that time, this would be around, I guess it was actually already April of 73. I didn't even know they had a jazz program at Eastman, but I got a call from Rayburn Wright, who was the head of the program there, his background was, he had been a trombone student at Eastman, and he was interested in jazz from the time he was young. After he graduated from Eastman, sometime in the late 40s, he was on the Glenn Miller band for a few years. This was after the war, after Glenn Miller had passed away. But he was in the trombone section and did some arranging for the band, and ended up living in New York City then after he got off the band, and started out as a staff arranger for Radio City for the shows there with the Rockettes and the big orchestra,
Well,
and ended up being the chief arranger there. And during that time, I don't know how they got acquainted, but he got acquainted with Manny Album, who was one of the most important freelance big band arrangers that often did some of the arrangements for the jazz soloists that occasionally had big budgets to do a record with big band that featured them. And they got to know each other. And as a result of that, they started in, I think, 1959, doing a summer workshop at Eastman called Arranger's Holiday, where they would invite, this was really for professional arrangements, not so much for arrangers, not so much a student thing, but they would invite arrangers to submit scores and recordings, and they would select a number of them, maybe 20 or 25, to come from all over the world and study with them for 3 weeks. And at the end of the 3 weeks, they would put on a concert. The first half of the concert was arrangements and compositions by the students. And then the second half was with a guest artist, and they sent their own arrangements, from professional arrangers. That became a very popular program. They used to pack the Eastman Theater with 2,000 people every summer when that went on. And then after they had been doing that for a while, I think around 69 or so, a friend of Ray's, I think they were students together, but he had ended up being Frederick Fennell's successor as director of the Eastman Wind Ensemble. Frederick Fennell had developed this special select wind orchestra, smaller than a wind orchestra, but sort of the classical equivalent of a specialized chamber orchestra called a wind ensemble. And Don Hunsberger was also a big jazz enthusiast. So he eventually talked to Ray after he had been doing these summer programs with Manny for, I don't know, maybe 10 years or so. He talked him into leaving Radio City and joining the faculty at Eastman and starting a jazz writing curriculum. That was the first thing. So he came up there. At the time, Chuck Mangione was at an instructorship position. He had been a student at Eastman, and he was just like an instructor in jazz there. He directed, I think they had, maybe he had 2 big bands already by that time, and he directed the first big band. And I don't think he taught any arranging. They just had a big band, and then they had 1 or 2, I think maybe 2 semesters in small group improvisation that Chuck was doing. And so I think around 72, he decided to leave the instructor position there. He did this concert in the Eastman Theater that eventually was bought by Mercury Records. It was with the Rochester Philharmonic, and he got some arrangers to arrange some things for his small group and a couple of singers he knew, a male singer and a female singer. They did a program that was called Friends in Love, and Mercury Records put out an LP of stuff from this concert, and it really went big on the charts. So he decided at that point to go out and promote that. I actually got to know Chuck because before I knew anything about his background, he was traveling at the time with a quartet that was electric bass and drums. Joe LaBarba was the drummer,
exactly.
And Jerry Nywood was the saxophonist. And he played Fender Rhodes, just playing some comping and stuff on some of the tunes. And they played at the Smiling Dog, so I actually met him before I ended up going to Eastman. But when that position opened up, Ray Wright's idea was to hire somebody similar to Chuck, but maybe hopefully a piano player or somebody, maybe a rhythm section player, because the idea that he had originally was to start a master's degree program where the non-pianists or non-trombonists, so he didn't actually teach trombone at the time, although he was a trombonist, but the instrumentalists in the jazz master's program would take studio lessons from a classical secondary teacher just to keep their technique going, and improvisation lessons with whoever the new hire would be would count as their studio lessons for the degree. And so there was this music critic named Ted Price when we had the band at Kent State. He did the arts writing for the Akron Beacon Journal, and he was a big fan of the big band. And also, we had a connection with Clark Terry. So sometime around 68 or 69, a position for the Buffalo Papers opened up, and Ted Price ended up going to Buffalo and doing the arts thing there. Of course, he knew about Eastman. He didn't know about the jazz program, but he started going to concerts, and he became good friends with Ray Wright. And then just about the time that this position opened up, Ray had Clark Terry as a guest soloist with the Eastman Jazz Ensemble. So he was the head of the search committee, and in addition to the people that apply for the job, he was trying to find out people that might be qualified that didn't know about it. So he asked both Ted Price and Clark Terry if they knew anybody that they thought would be good for this position, and they both mentioned my name. So that's how I got in the running. And then when he became really interested in me, then he flew down from Rochester to Cleveland. It was sometime around mid-April of 73. And the semester was still going, so we spent an afternoon together, and they decided to invite me up then to do a couple of days of teaching and direct a rehearsal of the Eastman Jazz Ensemble, and that's how I ended up getting the gig there.
Amazing. What a story. All coincidences, also many.
And then the thing with WDR was the same way.
Yeah, how did that happen? Yeah, I wanted to ask you, because you spent
yeah.
like almost 10 years with those guys, right? With
eight years, yeah.
8 years, yeah.
I have to preface this with another weird story because it comes from the experience with Clark.
Please, how did that happen? Yeah.
Two of the trombonists, Garney Hicks, who was the lead trombonist, and Roy Duvall, who was the bass trombonist, they ended up joining the ORF big band, the band in Vienna that Art Farmer was in. And but before they knew anything about that, when Clark left the second time after he'd been with Joe Williams at Kent State, we all had his phone number and contact information. He said, if any of you guys are ever in New York, give me a call. If I'm playing anywhere in town, I'll put you on the guest list. So Garney and Roy decided to go up and hear Clark one time. And he was playing at a club up in Harlem, which at that time was people considered a little dangerous. But he told everybody, he said, wherever the club is, don't worry if you just, go to the place, tell them you're there to hear me, everything will be okay. So they told me it took them about an hour before they could find a cab that would take them up there, but they found a cab that took them up there. And they went in and sat at the bar. And while they were sitting at the bar, they heard this guy next to them that was in conversation with somebody, and it sounded like he had a kind of foreign accent. And after a while, they heard him talking about this radio band that he was in. And so they started talking during the intermissions, and it turned out to be an arranger and one of the trombonists from the trombone section. His name was Heinz Chaddock. And he was telling them about these big bands they had in Europe, that there are lifetime positions, and you have retirement and health insurance and all of that. And Art Farmer's in this band. It's really amazing. So when they hired the bass trombone player, who was also my best friend in college, Roy Duvall, when he got off the plane there, the band manager picked him up and took him right to the studio to finish the rehearsal that day. And they got into the studio. He went and sat down in the trombone section, and he looked over to his right, and there's this guy that he was sitting next to in the bar in New York, listening to Clark Terry. So the ORF band, most of the bands in the European radio, they dissolved because of economic problems.
Yeah.
I think probably by the mid 80s. And when the ORF band dissolved, the second trombone player and Roy that were still there, they made a living playing in pit orchestras for Broadway shows that came through. And then there were a couple of people, especially Peter Herbolzheimer, the bass trombonist, who I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's a really great writer that had this group called Rhythm Combination and Brass. It was just
of course. Yeah. I have that album.
Brass group.
Peter
and Ferdinand Povel, the Dutch saxophonist, was the only reed player, the soloist. And so they would play when he would put together tours and do recordings. They played with him. And then George Gruntz also would put big bands together occasionally for tours in the summer or the festivals or for recording projects. So that's how they kept their jazz thing going. And then when the bass trombone position opened up in the WDR big band in Cologne, Roy applied for it and ended up getting the job. So, and then one more story that connects with this is in 76, I was directing the second band at Eastman called the Eastman Jazz Lab Band. And I really got into the stuff that Dave Liebman was doing at the time, especially the first records. I mean, I knew his work with Elvin, but the stuff with ECM, like starting with the Lookout Farm record.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Which
Yeah.
was that band.
Abercrombie, yeah, and Colin,
yeah,
it's beautiful.
Yeah. So when I got that record, I got in contact with Liebman and asked him if he would be interested in coming up and being a guest soloist with our band. So he agreed to do it. And so I'm always a maniac when I do these things. Like I really over prepare and get totally into the vocabulary of whatever's happening. So I transcribed a bunch of Ritchie stuff. Like I made a medley of MD and Lookout Farm, those two tunes. And Ritchie's whole intro, it sets up the theme. I transcribed that and orchestrated it for the ensemble.
Oh, wow.
And then I was really checking out Liebman's vocabulary, the kind of stuff that he was using to play, like the augmented scale and the diminished scale and the pentatonic stuff and sidestepping and things that he was using. And so there's the place at when it goes into Lookout Farm, before the theme is stated, I had the drummer go into that tempo. And then I had a section where I had these octave unison lines for the sax section where they traded eights and traded fours with him. And then it went into the head from there, which is sort of rubato, and then they go back to fast tempo. And when he had the first rehearsal with the band and we played through this thing, he was just totally speechless. And from that time on, we knew we were destined to, at least every few years, we had to do projects together. So the first project we did together after that is he got called to do a project with the NDR band in Hamburg. And so he had them hire me to do a couple other arrangements and to have us record a couple of duo things. And I had written a sonata for soprano, saxophone, and piano for a colleague of mine at Eastman. It was either for soprano or tenor, and Dave really liked that, so we played that too.
Oh.
And then we also did this medley of MD and Lookout Farm that we had played with the Eastman band. And so I think that was how some of the people in the WDR band and their manager, Wolfgang Hirschman, I think they must have heard that, or they heard about it from the band director, Dieter Glavishnik, at the time.
Oh, yeah.
And Roy had been telling people in the band about me, over the years. And so they started hearing this stuff and hearing some of the stuff that I had done. And then they decided to invite Liebman to go there. And when they did that was right after he had done this really interesting solo soprano thing that was just all over dub soprano called The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner.
Yeah, that's a beautiful record. Yeah. I know that one. Yeah.
So he sent me all that. He sent me that material, like just the solo stuff, that whatever was written out. And they hired me to write about a 20-minute piece for orchestra. Well, it was really like big band plus a string section and French horns and percussion and harp. So that was going to be the main centerpiece for the concert. We did the MD and Lookout Farm again, and then we played the sonata. But then the other thing that happened that was, again, totally out of nowhere is that the guy that was the director of the band that time, Jerry Van Rooyen, who's a great arranger, but this whole orientation was pretty straight ahead music. So when we started rehearsing this stuff, I think he felt a little uncomfortable trying to know what to tell the band to do or to be in the center or something like that. So it was fortunate that the band's pianist, Frank Chastanier, he had not booked any stuff during that 2-week period, or the week that we were there. It was a week. So after the second rehearsal, I think the manager asked me, since Frank was able to play piano, if I could direct the band and the orchestra, and then just play the sonata with Dave in the program. So we did that, and then everything went great. Everybody was really happy with what happened, and I didn't hear from anybody in the band or for maybe about a year and a half, and then around I think it was around fall of '82, I got a email from my friend, the bass trombonist, and he said that Jerry had decided to retire, and the band had met and the manager had met and everything, and they wanted him to ask me if I was interested in being the next
Okay.
chief director of the band. So of course I said yes, and
Then you moved to Cologne. Yeah.
yeah, and we had
Amazing.
eight great years there, and then similar thing there. Even really, the first contract that I did with them was 5 years, and then after that, I kind of felt like I wanted to maybe get back into teaching. I really was, I don't know how I did this, but in the last 3 or 4 years of that, well, most of my 3-year contract that I did after the 5-year contract, I took the position also as the head of the jazz program at the Musikhochschule in Cologne.
Oh, wow. Oh, yeah.
And
That's a lot.
because, well, the thing with the band, at least in terms of the directing part, it was just 12 weeks a year. It was like,
Yeah.
like being principal director for an orchestra. But the history of a little bit of the history of the music school in Cologne is that, like a lot of music schools there, and even a lot in the States at that time, all of the positions were part-time positions. So there was, even though they had a lot of really good people that were teaching there, nobody could really make a living from what they were paying them. So at the time, Jiggs Wiggum, the trombonist, had been the head of the program, but he also was playing in a big band. Originally, I think this was a little different big band, because the big band in Berlin, for some reason, from the beginning, instead of being funded by the radio, it had always functioned as a private big band that worked for the radio. So it was a little different situation. But he directed the big band at the conservatory and did a lot of the teaching there. And he gave them an ultimatum. He said, either give me a full-time position or I'm going to move permanently to Berlin. So they offered the permanent position, but he decided to move to Berlin anyhow. And so then the position was open. And the beginning, I didn't have any interest in it, but a guy that taught jazz theory there, he used to come and listen to rehearsals at the band. He asked me, if I would at least audition for the position, because they really wanted to get me to do that if I was interested at all. So I did, and I ended up being offered the job. So the last 3 years that I was there, I did both of those things.
Wow.
This friend of the guy that was one of the trombonists in the Vienna radio big band, Heinz Chaddick, he was also a very good big band arranger, and he did a lot of the arrangements for the ORF big band at the time, and also had at the time that we came back to the States, he had a 9-piece band that worked at a couple of clubs in Vienna that he wrote for regularly. And he was the head of the jazz writing program at the jazz school in Graz, which is the second biggest, And he decided to retire. And they had offered me that job there, which we were really interested in. But then before I accepted the job, we have just one child, a son, Evan, who's he does something else full time, but he's a very good jazz player too. He plays the trombone, and he had been living in New York. He decided to move back to Rochester at that time, where he grew up, and decided to get married and start a family. So before I accepted that job in Vienna, my colleague at Eastman, the saxophone teacher that I had written that saxophone sonata for, Raymond Rickard, he uh, they decided before they offered the what happened is the guy that replaced me there, Fred Sturm, who was a really good composer and arranger, a trombone player also, curiously. A lot of great jazz writers were trombone players, right? JJ
Actually,
and Slide
JJ,
Hampton
yeah,
and
sure.
Burt Meyer, yeah. So this he had been from the university. I can't remember the name of the school. It was in Appleton, Wisconsin. And he had really developed a great program there. They had a summer festival that invited well-known jazz artists to be guest clinicians and direct a big band there and everything. But the people whoever it was that they got to replace him, they just wanted to get Fred back. So they finally gave him an offer that he couldn't refuse, and then that position opened up again. So the administration decided, they contacted some alumni that had gone through the program, like John Fedshock and Bob Shepard and Maria Schneider and a bunch of people like that. And they asked them if they thought it was worth contacting me to see whether I was interested in coming back before they advertised the position. And so just right after we found out that we were going to be grandparents, but before I had signed the contract to take this job in Vienna, Ray Ricker called me and asked me if we were interested in coming back to Rochester. So that's when we came back and got back just in time for the first grandchild. And then I sort of taught the other side of the street. Before we moved to Cologne, I was teaching jazz piano and improvisation and small group stuff. And then when I came back, of course, I'd done a ton of writing. I think I wrote about 400 charts for the band in Cologne in those 8 years.
So
by the time I got back, I was really ready to try to pass on as much of that as I could. Fortunately, also, I got to do several projects with the Metropole Orchestra while I was over there. One with Liebman, actually.
Oh, wow.
And, so we actually had Liebman come back after I rejoined the faculty and be the guest soloist with the Eastman Studio Orchestra while I was still doing that. And so that's another example, just how one thing leads to another.
Yeah. How did you? I listened to that record that you did, to two actually, with Peter Erskine. How did you connect with Peter? What's your story with him?
Yeah, I mainly connected with Peter from. This is another interesting thing, though. After World War II, they have 16 states in Germany, and after World War II, they eventually personneled two full orchestras for each of those radio TV complexes. One that was the symphony orchestra that did all the major classical stuff and new commissions and everything, and one that was called the radio orchestra, which did operettas and stuff from musical shows, and sometimes collaborating with the big band, and then a full big band, and they also had about an 80 voice chorus. And the big band, when they first started up, it was really almost more like a dance band, because all the popular music then, it was all the big bands, especially not so much Ellington and Strayhorn as Benny Goodman and Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey and that kind of stuff. And so I think it was around 68 or 69, the late 60s or early 70s, I would say. The guy that was in charge he was like the manager for all the orchestras. His name was I can't remember his name right now. Maybe it'll come to me. But he liked jazz, and one of his favorite composers and arrangers was Bill Holman. And so he got in touch with Bill Holman and asked him if he was interested in coming over and doing a project with the big band. And he said, sure. So he went over, and the band basically did a real good job on the music. But the drummer that they had, although he was a good, basic straight ahead drummer, he really didn't know what to do in, music that was as broad in concept as what Holman was writing at the time. And it was more toward what Thad and Mel were doing than what Basie's band was doing. Just put it that way.
Yeah.
And they tried to talk him into they tried to move him horizontally to one of the percussion positions in one of the orchestras. But since he was hired to be the drummer in the big band, he just refused. So at a certain point, this guy that ran all the orchestras agreed to let the big band hire a different drummer for every project that they did.
Okay.
So they could hire anybody that was directing the project, whoever they wanted that they thought would do the music the best. Well, Jerry Van Rooyen was doing most of the stuff then, so I think maybe this guy still did a lot of the stuff that Jerry did, but then that was when not only Holman, but some of the people like Bob Brookmeyer and Patrick Williams and John Clayton and people like that were starting to come over and do things. And so when I took over my stint there starting in 94, that's what they were doing. So I worked with a whole range of drummers. The manager, Wolfgang Hirschman, and we'd decide on a project to do, and whatever the repertoire was, he would offer me a kind of list of drummers, which one do you think would be best for this program? So I got to work with Dennis McCrell and John Riley and Jeff Hamilton and Peter Erskine and there were at least 2 or 3 others. But that's how I first got to do some things with Peter. Oh, Adam Nussbaum. Yeah, there were quite a few, and they were all great. So the other thing that happened is that the first CD that I did was with them was let's see, who was the drummer on that? Yeah, I can't even remember right now, but it was a record that was a Mingus project, and it featured Kevin Mahogany, the vocalist.
Oh, really? I have to find this one. I don't know.
Yeah, it's called Pussycat Dues.
Oh,
it was for the Enja label, and it also featured Charles McPherson and Jimmy Nepper. They were
wow, really? Oh, wow, amazing.
Yeah. So that was the first thing that came out, and then around 2000 or just before that, I did a couple of projects of just repertoire that they hired Peter for. And the thing that I loved about Peter is he seems to be able to play about 40% less than most drummers, and yet make it all mean so much more musically. He could just play just the right stuff. Know when he's supposed to be the center and when he's supposed to be underneath and all of that. That was just apparent from the beginning. I love that. And so we did a lot of live, the venues that we used in Cologne when I was there, about maybe 6 programs a year we would do at the big Philharmonic Hall. And then there was a nice concert hall that seated about 500 people, I think, called the Zendazal, that was in the radio building where we rehearsed every day. And then there was also a really nice theater kind of setting in a place called the Stadtgarten. That was a restaurant and bar. And so Peter had done programs with us at different places like that. And then we did a program of his music called Drums and Horns. And he invited me to arrange, I think, maybe 6 or 8 of his tunes for that program. And between things that we did in the various programs, including original things of mine, we did put out the CD called Prism.
Mm-hmm.
That was a name of one of the tunes of mine that was on there. And
that's
so
nice
included, three of Peter's tunes. Song for Jocko, which was written after Jocko died, from memory of him. A piece called Bulgaria.
Oh, yeah, with John Taylor.
The interesting story behind that one is that even though it sounds like a compound Bulgarian rhythm, it's actually in 3/2, but just the way it's subdivided, it feels that way. And he wrote that actually when the Bulgarian soccer team was playing in the World Cup.
Really? I didn't know that. Oh man. I know they did a version with Pale Danielson and John Taylor.
Yeah.
Beautiful
Yeah.
tune. Yeah, that's a beautiful
Yeah.
tune.
And then I also did a ballad that was on that record called "If Only I Had Known."
Mm.
And yeah, so that's how we had done quite a few big band projects together. And then I was over during that time, I think when we did that project, I can't remember which probably was. We were doing a big band project that Peter was playing on.
Yeah.
I can't remember which one it was. And after the project was over, we spent a couple extra days there and recorded that trio
The
record.
trio, yeah, the trio. It's beautiful. I always love
Thank you.
because it's so rare to hear you in these smaller settings. You know, you've known as a monster arranger and composer, and then you play so beautifully while we're young and Danny Boy and all those tunes in trio, and it's like, wow, man, that's so nice, you know. So
Well,
I wish
thank you
you've done
so
more
much.
of that stuff, actually.
Well,
Uh,
I love getting to do that. I did let's see, there isn't a lot of stuff that I did that's that's available. That's in that vein, actually. Yeah,
mm,
yeah. I did a. Trying to think of the other. Yeah, I mean, and all the other trio things that I did were for small labels
mm.
or local things that are all out of print, unfortunately.
Yeah, would be nice to somehow get them to Bandcamp or something to just, yeah, for people to hear.
Yeah,
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 that's a
yeah.
project.
It was really a pleasure to get to do that, and
Yeah, yeah. 'Cause I mean, the last one I heard was with Bill Grimes and Rich Thompson, and
yeah, yeah.
which is again a beautiful one. It's like that. There's this beautiful ballad for you. I
For
listened
you
to it
with
today.
love.
Yeah, it's such a
Oh,
nice tune.
oh, thank you. Oh, you got a copy of that. That's great.
It's
Okay.
so beautiful, man. And but
Well, thank you.
have you done anything since that record, like record recording, like or?
I haven't actually. I
Hmm.
did yeah, I did a couple of solo records that turned out very well. For
Solo piano.
yeah, for
Oh,
a period
really?
of time.
Okay.
Unfortunately, they're both out of print too.
Ah, shit. Okay.
They were for a small record company that was out for a while called Sons of Sound,
Hmm.
and I think for about 8 years or so before I retired, I did maybe 10 years. I did a solo concert in um, can't remember the name of the hall now, but it's a really good. Oh, Hatch Recital Hall at Eastman. It was a new hall
Hmm.
that they built that just opened for performances. I think around 2006 or so. And we have an international jazz festival every summer there, and they have usually a solo pianist or sometimes a duo or something like that happening in Hatch for a couple of sets every night. And I would do a solo program every year in Hatch during the school year, and then usually do 2 sets of that stuff during the festival. And I started a series for Sons of Sound called Composer Series. Well, the first volume was music of Claire Fisher and George Gershwin.
Oh, wow.
And,
Yes.
then the second one was music of Ellington and Strayhorn. But I did a lot of Ellington and Strayhorn that's not done very often. More, I did a couple of the well-known things, but a lot more of the more obscure things like Second Portrait of the Lion and Bull Weevil Ballet.
Hmm. Oh, I don't know this one. Okay.
Yeah. Uh, and it turned out very well. Was one of the best there were two of the best CDs of the year. It was in Downbeat reviews, got 4.5 stars.
Oh,
And
wow.
within the time they were written up, within 6 months of when they were written up in Downbeat, the label crashed. And
Oh, Christ.
so,
Shit. Oh, man. You should
yeah,
somehow buy them from the labor or somehow or get them out, or
yeah,
it would
yeah.
be nice to get the music out. Yeah.
The thing I've loved, and I know Peter and John Goldsby, they're the same way. I've enjoyed trying to be as comfortable as possible playing in a really wide range of idioms. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you seen the DVD that I did on the evolution of solo jazz piano?
No, I have to. Oh, so
Oh yeah, you could Google that and find it on the net because
I'll try to find.
I did a series. I was inspired by Dick Hyman.
Mhm.
Dick Hyman came out with an LP, and I think it was, I don't know, around the 80s or early 90s. There was a small label that eventually went out of print, Chiaroscuro Records.
Oh yeah, I know that one. Yeah,
Yeah, we used to call it Chiaroscuro.
they did some good stuff actually.
They did a lot of great stuff.
Yeah, I
The thing
remember.
that's too bad is that those things pop up for a while, and then before you know it, they're out of print and you can't get them anymore. But I got this record he put out, a solo record called Variations on a Child is Born. And he plays that, well, it was a Thad Jones tune, but it actually evolved out of something that Roland Hanna was improvising. He would do like some in-between tune things at the Vanguard when they played there, and
I really
that helped some of those ideas into that tune. And he had a Scott Joplin variation, and then a James P. Johnson variation, and Fats Waller, I think, and Art Tatum, of course, one of the Boogie Woogie players, I can't remember who it was, and Bud Powell, of course, and I don't know if Monk was in there or not. There was a Bill Evans, and even the Cecil Taylor. And I thought, man, that is great. And so must have been quite a while later, like maybe in the mid 90s. One thing that I did for I know this stuff is available. You could get it from Schott Music, Schott, the publisher.
Oh yeah, I know.
I did a series of books of piano preludes that also came out in recordings. There are 4 volumes with 6 preludes in each book, 24 preludes, and they cover all the major and minor keys. They're inspired by particular kinds of or individuals in jazz, or some classical music, or some even by some of my interests in world music, like gamelan music and the Mbira music and Kyoto music, and we also put out well, the people that was another thing. The people that I met when we were at the International Association of Jazz Educators convention in Columbus, Ohio in 1983. I think it was still just national then, NAJE. Ray Wright took the Eastman Studio Orchestra there, and we did a set with Clark Terry, and I did one piece with the orchestra as well. And I met this husband and wife, Hans and Veronica Gruber, that were starting this jazz publications company called Advanced Music in this little town near Tübingen called Württemberg am Neckar in Germany. And I ended up doing a lot of publications for them, including a couple of arranging books. The first one called Jazz Arranging and Composing, a Linear Approach, which is basically about arranging and composing for up to 5 horns and rhythm section, with sections on writing for each section, 1 horn, 2 horns, etc. And some we did some play along stuff. I did a book called a contemporary approach to, no, a creative approach to jazz piano harmony, and some other things. But I did these books of preludes for them, but then we also recorded them in this really nice studio it was in the Black Forest. I can't remember exactly where, but we got to use one of the engineers that I can't remember his name now exactly, but one of the engineers that had done a lot of the ECM records. So I love, it was a real thrill getting to work with him a little bit. And we did a series of solo CDs that were called Preludes and Predilections, 4 volumes of those, and each of those has 6 of these preludes then it also has about 6 or 7 pieces from the American Songbook or the jazz repertoire. And that's also where we recorded this series of variations. And using Dick Hyman as a kind of inspiration, I wrote this original melody that was based on the chord changes of All of Me.
Mm.
And the melody is sort of the original melody upside down with a little embellishments here and there. And then I decided on 24 pianists, 12 traditional pianists and 12 modern pianists to do variations in the style of. And I limited them to the only way I could think of limiting them was, I had to cut out some of my favorites, but I limited them to pianists that did at least a couple of solo piano records who were very influential as solo pianists as well as pianists, trio pianists or pianists in rhythm sections. So the traditional ones were Jelly Roll Morton, James P. Johnson, Fats Waller, Willie the Lion Smith, Earl Hines, and Art Tatum. And the three, some of them I'm not remembering. We did 3 of the Boogie Woogie pianists also. I did we did Duke Ellington was one of the traditional ones, and then there was Mead Lux Lewis, Pete Johnson, and Jimmy Yancey. But those were like the 12 traditional, and the modern ones started with Monk, and included Monk and Bud Powell and Errol Garner and Bill Evans. I did a Cecil Taylor one as well, and the more modern ones were Chick Corea, Keith Jarrett, and
Herbie.
Richie Beck. And there were a couple other ones as well. Oh, Claire Fisher, of course, and Lenny Tristano.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Anyway, I recorded all of those at the same studio with that same engineer on a really great. It was like a Busendorfer baby grand, and discussed a little bit the contributions of each pianist. So you can find that online.
I tried searching this, yeah.
But you can also get the DVD of that, of my playing it, and that's available from Schott also. It's called The Evolution of Solo Jazz Piano.
Fantastic. Yeah, I don't have that. I have many CDs, but not that. So yeah.
So during my stint, all those years at Eastman, I well, even in Cologne too. I mean,
a lot,
Eastman,
yeah.
I played with everybody with people from Clark Terry to Anthony Braxton, and in Cologne, I played with people from Clark Terry to Steve Lacy.
Yeah, amazing.
One of the most inspiring things I had the good fortune of getting to do a monk program, was write a monk program.
Oh man, with Steve, yeah, sure, yeah.
Before he passed, and that was such a thrill to get to know him a little bit and hang out. And
he was such a player,
yeah. I mean, all in all, I just have to say, besides having the good fortune of marrying one of the most wonderful women I could have ever married, Darlene, I feel like I've won the lottery dozens of times over.
That's nice.
Including the fact that I don't think I could think of a time or place in history when I would rather have been born than where and when I was.
Yeah, that's so beautifully put, man. Yeah, I think I'll finish here the recording actually, because this is such a nice end that I don't want to spoil it. It's like you have now the perfect.
Jazz. jazz.